We're in chapter 7 about captivity to an enraged foe. So we have a bad stream. Oh, it's green. Okay. Hopefully that came through for you. Okay. Number 3. This captivity is contrary to a man's will. No one is made a captive except against his will. No one willingly submits to the misery and trouble of captivity, though one may submit to sin, which leads to captivity. Several things follow from this. 1. The power of sin is great. My stream looks like it's doing really bad. Of course, on the actual site, it looks like it's doing well, except I'm getting pauses, it looks like. Okay. Several things follow from this. 1. The power of sin is great. That it should prevail against the diligence I've never had this happen before, where my I'm saving a symbol. Okay, maybe I'm closing some stuff on my site. I found the movie Nashville on my computer. That's weird. I didn't know I had that. Very bizarre. But I've never seen it before, so maybe I'll watch it. Okay. According to this, I'm not doing well with the stream, but I'm just going to continue. Who knows what will come out. The power of sin is great. That it should prevail against the diligence, activity, watchfulness, and constant resistance of the will proves this clearly. 2. Sin has many particular successes. It cannot be said to lead captive without success. These are of several kinds. Sometimes it carries the person to actual outward sin, which is its highest aim. Sometimes it obtains the consent of the will, but is blocked by grace and proceeds no further. Sometimes it wearies and entangles the soul so that it stops fighting. This is success too. One or more of these must take place where there is captivity. The apostle ascribes this kind of course to covetousness. 1 Timothy 6, 9, and 10. Let's go there. Well, nobody's getting anything. 1 Timothy 6, 9, and 10. Philippians. I always tend to forget about those pastoral epistles, because they're like squeezed in between. Okay, 1 Timothy 6, 9, and 10. Oh, I almost went the opposite direction. And of course, I can't get that one page versus. Those who want, this is right, 1 Timothy 6, 9, 10. But those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare, and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil, and some by longing for it have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. So, covetousness. Love of money. Okay. 3. The condition of captivity is miserable and wretched. How galling it is to bear this yoke against the judgment of the mind and the choice and consent of the will, and with the utmost strife and contention. This pierces, grieves, and even breaks the heart. Grace makes the soul loathe sin and every evil way, and hate the least discrepancy between itself and the holy will of God, therefore to be imposed on by this law of sin, with all the enmity, folly, deadness, and filth which attend it. What more dreadful condition is there? All captivity is dreadful in its own nature. What makes it worse is the kind of tyrant to whom someone is subject. And what can be worse than this law of sin? Hence the apostle, after mentioning this captivity, cries out as one quite weary and ready to faint. That's Romans 7:24 again. 4. This captivity is peculiar to believers. Unregenerate men are not said to be subject to the law of sin, though they are willing captives of this or that particular sin. They oppose sin only when it disturbs their consciences, and this opposition is not from their wills, but only from light in the mind and conscience. It is the guilt and consequences of sin that trouble them, not its nature. This is all I shall say concerning captivity to the law of sin. 4. The fourth and last degree of the opposition made by sin to God, his will, and his grace is its rage and madness. Madness is in its nature and in the evil hearts of men. Ecclesiastes 9:3. They are likened to wild asses. Jeremiah 2:24. Hosea 8:9. In their unrestrained lusts, just as idolaters are said to be mad concerning their souls. Jeremiah 50:38. What is this madness, and how does it rise to this height? 1. It seems to consist in a violent, headstrong, stubborn pursuit of evil or sin. It tears and tortures the soul on behalf of any sin to force its consent and obtain satisfaction. It rises up in the heart, is denied by the law of grace, and rebuked, but it returns and exerts its poison again. The soul is startled and casts it off, but it returns again with new violence and importunity. The soul cries out for help and deliverance, looks around about to all springs of gospel grace and relief. It trembles at the furious assaults of sin and casts itself into the arms of Christ for deliverance. But if it cannot take this course, it is foiled and hurried up and down through the mire and filth of foolish imaginations, corrupt and noisome lusts, which rend and tear it as if they would devour its whole spiritual life and power. See 1 Timothy 6:9-10, 2 Peter 2:14. This is plain madness and fury. We need not go far for examples. We see men mad on their lusts every day. It is not so much that their lusts rage in them as that they rage in pursuit of their lusts. The greedy pursuit of things in the world, indeed, is nothing but plain madness in the pursuit of men's lusts. 2. However, sin does not ordinarily rise to this height unless it has a double advantage. A. It is heightened by some great temptation. It does not grow so violent and outrageous without the contribution of some new poison injected by Satan through a suitable temptation. This is what happened with David. Through a suitable temptation, his lust was raised to the rage and madness seen in the business of Bathsheba and Uriah. Though always a fire in the bones, sin does not burst into flame until Satan comes with his bellows to blow it up. And anyone in whom the law of sin rises to this height may, on serious consideration, be able to see where the devil stands in contributing to the business. B. It has had a previous success and victory. Sin does not grow to this height at its first assault unless there has been some yielding to it in the soul. The great wisdom and security of the soul in dealing with indwelling sin is to put a violent stop to it at its first motion, venture all on the first attempt, die rather than yield to it. If, through the deceitfulness of sin, the negligence of the soul, or its carnal confidence that it can limit lust's acts, as at other times, sin enters the soul. If sin finds any agreement in the soul at all, it gains strength and gradually rises to this madness. You would never have experienced this fury of sin if you had not dallied with it before, if you had not brought up this servant, this slave, delicately. It would not have presumed more than the son. Now, when the law of sin has this double advantage of vigorous temptation and some former victory, it often rises to the strength I have spoken of. 3. We may now see what accompanies this rage and madness, and what its properties and effects are. A. It casts off, for a time at least, the government of the Spirit and law of grace. Where grace has the dominion, it will never be utterly expelled from its throne. It will retain its right and sovereignty, once God, always God's. But its influences may be interrupted for a time, and its government suspended by the power of sin. Does it look as if the law of grace had any actual rule over the heart of David, when, after the provocation he received from Nabal, he was so carried away with the desire for personal revenge that he cried to his companions, "Gird on your swords," and resolved not to leave one man of Nabal's whole household alive, 1 Samuel 25:34. Or was Asa, because remember, Abigail then interceded and had to stop David from destroying everybody. Or was Asa in a better state when he put the prophet in prison for speaking to him in the name of the Lord, 2 Chronicles 16:10. Sin in such cases is like an untamed horse, which, having first thrown off his rider, runs away in a fierce rage. It first casts off a present sense of the yoke of Christ and the law of his grace, and then hurries the soul to do what it wishes. Let us briefly consider how this is done. Because grace occupies the whole soul, the mind, the will, and the affections, since the whole soul is renewed by grace into the image of God, Ephesians 4:23-24, and the whole man is a new creation, 2 Corinthians 5:17, the law of sin must try to interrupt the operation of the same faculties. It darkens the mind through countless prejudices and false arguments, and through the heating of the affections by lusts that have taken hold of them. So the saving light in the mind is clouded and cannot transform the soul into the likeness of Christ as it should, Romans 12:2. The habitual inclination of the will to obedience is first weakened and then nullified by continual temptations. Finally, the will surrenders to its adversary. As for the affections, usually the evil starts with them. They oppose one another and torture the soul with their impetuous violence. So the rule of the law of grace is thwarted by the law of sin in its own seat of government. Then sin makes sad work in the soul. The apostle warns believers not to let this happen. Romans 6:12. Sin must not be allowed to usurp the throne of your heart. Guard against this, or a sad state of affairs will soon follow. This, then, is what accompanies the fury of the law of sin. It casts off the present rule of the law of grace. Grace cries out, "Do not do this abominable thing which the Lord hates," but does not prevail, at least not to the extent of putting a stop to the rage of sin and recovering its own rule. But God in his own time will restore it by the power of his Spirit dwelling in us. B. Fearlessness and contempt of danger also accompany this mad rage. Deliberate thought and all the influence it ought to have on the soul is removed. Sinners wholly under the power of this rage challenge God directly. Job 15:25-26. They secretly resolve to accomplish their lusts, though it cost them their souls. We will understand this more clearly when we consider 1. Often when the soul has broken away from the power of renewing grace, God keeps it within bounds by preventing grace. He declares that he will deal with Israel in this way. Hosea 2:6. He will place obstacles before them that they will not be able to pass. Let's look at that, Hosea 2:6. Might as well stop. I'm kind of blowing through this, but there's a reason that you may figure out. And you may not figure it out. Something arrived in the mail today. I'll give you that hint. Something arrived in the mail yesterday. You'll never figure it out. Therefore, behold, I will hedge up her way with thorns, and I will build a wall against her so that she cannot find her paths. She will pursue her lovers, but she will not overtake them, and she will seek them, she will not find them, and she will say, I will go back to my first husband, for it was better for me then than now. This blocks off the way to false idols, so that she will return to her first husband, which is the Lord. 2. These hindrances are of 2 sorts. 1. Rational considerations, based on the consequences of sin, such as death, judgment, hell, and falling into the hands of the living God, who is a consuming fire. A man under the law of the Spirit of life is constrained by the love of Christ. 2 Corinthians 5:14. His doing good and abstaining from evil are based on faith working by love, and following Christ because of the sweet savor of his name. But when this blessed easy yoke is for a time cast off, God sets a hedge of terror before the soul, flashes the flames of hellfire in its face, and fills it with the evil consequences of sin, making use of all the threatenings of both law and gospel. To this we may add considerations from things temporal, such as shame, reproach, scandal, punishments, and the like. By these means, I say, God sets a hedge before them. 2. Providential dispensations are used to the same credit, to the same end, including both afflictions and mercies. God is angry and strikes them. Isaiah 57:17. He chastens men with bodily pain to turn them from their purpose and keep them from sin. Job 33:17-19. Or he may touch them in their reputations, families, estates, or prized possessions, or else he may heap mercies on them for a prolonged period to make them consider against whom they are rebelling. His providence may actually prevent the soul from pursuing sin, even when it is resolved to do so. However, when lust rises to enraged madness, it will despise all this, including God's rod and the one who has appointed it. See Micah 6:9, and will rush on in the face of shame, reproach, wrath, and whatever else may come. Such mad rage is fearless. It grips the mind, preventing the sober consideration of hindrances, and rendering the thought of them slight and insubstantial. If the mind does consider them, the madness of sin seeks to come between the mind and the affections, so that the affections are not influenced nearly enough. In such a condition, the soul will remain unmoved, or will be moved only for a time. By a secret stubborn resolve, the soul resolves to stake everything on the path it has embarked on, and this is further evidence of the power of indwelling sin, the great opposition it makes to the law of grace by way of violence. 8. The deceitfulness of sin. Chapter 8. But indwelling sin carries on its opposition to God. Let's see how long this chapter is. I guess I could do that as a separate one. Sure, let's do that.